Hey guys, let's talk about books. This is my 5 read series where I talk about 5 books that I've read recently. First book for this video is how to talk about books you haven't read, which is ironic because I did read this one, obviously. This is by Pierre Bayard and translated from the French by Geoffrey Melman. The French and the English versions both came out in 2007. This is essentially how to, as it says on the title, how to talk about books you haven't read, but more specifically, how to take books that you have read and slot them into their cultural place so that you have other frames of reference for a book. When you're talking about books that you haven't read, you can relate them to books that you may have read or that you know about and be able to cogently hold a conversation or a discussion about the book that you don't know. But also, one of the things that he mentions in here is basically postmodernism, which is the way that we interpret language. So if you read a book and I read a book, if we read this book, we've read different books because we will interpret them differently. We will remember parts of it differently. Parts of it will stick with us, parts of it we will forget entirely. And so even if we are talking about the same book that we have read, we will have interpreted it differently, think about it differently, talk about it differently. How is that any different to not having read the book at all? He also uses a system in here of annotations whenever he mentions a book, whether it's a book that's known to him or unknown to him, and whether he has a positive, a negative, or a neutral opinion of the book, including referencing his own previous books, which made me laugh. That's the gist of it, very postmodern in that, what if you've read the book and you've forgotten the book? How is that any different to having not read the book in the first place? It made me laugh because I love postmodernism. It's my favorite approach to theory. And I don't think you need to read this. I think it's just an introduction to postmodernism and the way that we differ in our interpretation of life, of everything that you've ever put in your eyeballs or in your ears. That would be different to everybody else. I did enjoy it though. Next up we have The Silver Bone by Andrey Kurkov. This was published in Russian, originally translated to English in 2024. The original I think came out in 2020, and it's the first in a series of detective mysteries, cozy historical detective mysteries set in the Ukraine in 1919. The first one is, which is wartime, not just World War One. Like World War One's finished, obviously, but 1919 we've got Russian-Ukraine War 1. And Kurkov wrote a few of these and then took a break because of the current Russian-Ukraine war. Blurb on here makes it sound like a cross between Kafka and the Thursday Murder Club, basically. Kafka in that is bureaucratic absurdity. Our protagonist, Samson, he starts off watching his father be killed by Cossack soldiers, and he himself loses his ear in the fighting, and he comes from a wealthy family, and so he needs to make it as the only person left in his family with dwindling funds and army occupying the city, and he meets a girl that he likes, and she's very Soviet focused, and she's like, why don't you get a job? So Samson gets a job with the police. He just waltzes in and says the things that could be interpreted as what the police want to hear, and so he just gets a job. And then it turns out that his severed ear, which he has kept, can still hear things. So it's got a bit of magical realism, which I was not expecting, but rounded it out a little from just a pedestrian, cozy murder mystery, which it is in this historical setting. So the setting is interesting. Samson himself recognizes the absurdity of his situation, but the only way that he can deal with it is to solve the murders that are happening, even though bureaucracy tells him, don't bother, we're just trying to get through it, basically. And eventually he solves the mystery, obviously, because he's the hero, gets the girl, potentially, and forges new friendships, but also uses the help of his old friendships from his wealthy life to solve the murder, take down the corrupt bosses, save the day. I enjoyed it. I would read more. I mean, it was perfectly cromulent as a cozy mystery. Wasn't the best, wasn't the worst. Next up was Medieval Horizons, Why the Middle Ages Matter by Ian Mortimer. Now, if you pay attention, you will know that I bought this on audiobook earlier this year, and I didn't even get through the introduction. It made such an impact on me that I had to buy a physical version. This was published in 2023, and I loved it. The premise is that, and the part that made me buy the book, is in the introduction, Mortimer talks about two well-known historians, Noah Yuval Harari, which I have problems with Sapiens anyway, and the other one is Ian Morris, and basically saying broad sweeping things about the medieval period that are demonstrably not true, but it's pop culture true, you know, which is the way that we think about the medieval period is not the actual things that happened in the medieval period. So that's the premise of this book, is to take down those misconceptions. And Mortimer approaches it with the concept of horizons. So let me consult my notes about what those horizons are. He has the physical horizon, which is, you know, the literal skyline. Oh, I should say, he makes the point that in the medieval period from 1000 to 1600, which admittedly is the start of the early modern period, but between 1000 and 1600, the world changed more greatly than from 1600 to today. So the point that these other historians were making was that like nothing changed in the medieval period, which is ridiculous in itself. It's 1,000 years of history broadly. But Mortimer is saying between 1000 and 1600, the world changed so drastically that somebody transplanted from 1000 to 1600 would have no idea what's going on, versus someone from 1600 to today would be more comfortable with the changes that have occurred, even though we've got things like internet, cars, that sort of thing. So let me tell you the horizons that Mortimer is talking about. He's got the physical horizon, which is the literal skyline. In the 500 years, we have the rise of literal cathedrals, the literal rise of cathedrals, which changed the physical horizon forever because those buildings are massive. We have the personal horizon, with individuals being able to travel further, longer, go on pilgrimage, trade, traveling, even actual vacation, holiday traveling by the end of this period. The collective horizon, which is discovering and mapping the shapes of most of the land masses in the world. The commercial horizon, which is currency, banking, trading, expanding. Memory horizon, which is written records. We have the advent of paper, so that paper becomes faster and cheaper to produce than vellum and parchment. So you have more things just being written down. You have governments creating records, and we still have those records. The religious horizon, which obviously is the Reformation, but it's so much more. I actually wrote a quote here. By 1600, the people of Europe were divided by their faith, not united by it. Whereas the Roman Catholic Church had been a reason for Christian kings not to fight each other in 1000, now it had become a factor exacerbating their political differences. We also have things like the development of purgatory is a theological construction of that period. We have the Crusades. The first Crusade was called in 1089 or 1099, somewhere around there. So we had the whole history of the Crusades between 1000 and 1600. We have the scientific horizon, which is universities, heliocentrism, electricity, the concept of zero, using Arabic numerals, measuring and standardizing time, the Gregorian calendar. Like, can you imagine life without any of those things? That all happened in that later medieval period. Technology horizon, printing, which we talked about. You create records because the creation of paper, and then you can print, then you can replicate ideas quickly, disseminate ideas quickly. We have explosives, the compass, windmills, spinning wheels, glasses like spectacles, mirrors, and then law and order, which is the shift from courts that you could access every couple of years to assize courts, which came around every couple of months. And then the development of local courts, where for minor issues you could have your chance at justice more quickly, resolve issues more quickly. Perhaps not in your favour, but still it's more standardised. And then there's ecclesiastical courts, which don't exist anymore, but they dealt with moral crimes. So things like bridal pregnancy, sexual incontinence, prostitution, bastardy, incest, defamation, drunkenness, usury, even absence from church, and of course, heresy. Now, ecclesiastical courts could try people and punish people, but if they needed to, like heresy, have physical punishment, then it was called relaxing to their secular arm. And then the law, as you and I would perceive it, cops, as you and I would perceive them today, would enact that physical penalty on a person. Finally, the medical horizon. Because in the High Middle Ages, which is around 1200, we had a renaissance of Greek and Latin literature that had been lost to Western Europe. It had been translated to Arabic, and then people in the Arab world used that knowledge as well as their own. They built on that, built up the medical knowledge, and then all of that was translated back to Latin in the 1200s. So that creates an explosion of science and medical knowledge. Now, admittedly, the church still didn't want people to learn medicine, like of the human body, dissect people, that sort of thing. They were really against religious learning that, so monks and that sort of thing. Who were people who went to university? Medicine still needed to wait until the end of this 500 years to really get going, but that's where it started. If you are interested in the medieval period and you don't know where to start, I think this is a lovely book. Just in the comparison, start thinking about how people lived and how the world has changed since then. But also, if you are interested in the medieval period and want some broad overview books, let me know because I have some recommendations. Also, I hadn't read any Ian Mortimer before, although I do have The Time Traveller's Guide to Medieval England on my shelf. So I'm going to bump that up the TBR because this was definitely readable. I did listen to it all, but I needed to get that physical copy so I could highlight literally everything because I thought it was great. And then moving on from great, I read The Mountain in the Sea by Nayler on my Kindle. This one came out in 2022 and it's getting all the hype in one of my book club discords. And so when it came up reasonably cheap on Amazon, I picked it up and I did not enjoy this, you guys. I did not enjoy it. It is a first contact novel in the traditional sense, except that it's first contact with a population of octopuses living off the coast of Vietnam who have developed written culture. So they have that ability to have a continual social memory, cultural memory that, of course, animals don't have, but we do, and that's why humans have dominance on the planet. But it's about that. It's about scientists who are trying to make contact with these octopuses who for decades now have been killing people who come too close to their habitat. But, I mean, there's some other characters too, blah, blah, blah. It wasn't interesting enough for me to remember their names or really what the point of them were, except it's really a commentary on how humans have fucked the planet. And if we have fucked the planet to the point where there are people in AI ships, like slaves in AI ships, farming the deep ocean for fish because we have overfished the planet, we've overpopulated the planet. Why do we deserve to interfere with another sentient culture, even if they are on our planet? Like, what gives us the right to impose ourselves on the octopuses who clearly don't want interference from humans? And that was basically the commentary of the book. I wanted it to be meeting the octopuses, talking to them, getting to know their culture, getting to understand how they communicate. But it was really about, do we have the right to interfere with alien species, alien cultures when we fucked it up ourselves? So I didn't have a good time with this book, but you might, if you like first contact stories, this might be for you. It was not for me. And lastly, we have Stuart Turton's The Last Murder at the End of the World, which came out in 2024. And you will remember I was so hyped for this book. So hyped. There's literally no way it could have met my expectations. And it did not. Oh, don't you hate that? It was not as good, I thought, as his previous two, which I absolutely loved, which, as you know, are The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle and The Devil and the Dark Water. Turton has made a deliberate attempt to make all of his books so far different genres, different styles. And so this one is the last people on Earth that they know of. It's people, scientists and villagers who are living on an island in the Mediterranean that is surrounded by a fog that is deadly. And so to all intents and purposes, they are the last people on Earth. They can't leave the island. And they all have to work together to keep the balance of their little society. So they all have to work, they all have their place, they all contribute. And the scientists, there's 3 scientists, and they are the leaders of this community. And then somebody's murdered. And the one person who doesn't have a place in society, doesn't feel comfortable, is always questioning authority, is the only person who can solve this murder. Nobody believes that it is a murder. They think it's just a tragic accident fire that has happened. But, and I should have mentioned this earlier, everybody on this island can communicate with an AI just in their heads. And the AI can't remember what happened, can't remember how the murder occurred. And so the AI, who is called Abby, needs the help of Emery, the main character, to solve the murder. But, plot twist, the fog, now that the murder has happened, is coming closer and closer. And of course, it's deadly. And so it's going to consume them all unless the murder can be solved in like 2 days. Dun, dun, dun. I'm not going to give you more spoilers than that, but it was pacey, it was interesting. It's about finding your place in the world, and because Emery doesn't have a place in the community, but she does have a place by the end of the book, and how she comes to that point. It's about memory and the continuation of memory, which is how we do culture and society, but also the importance of forgetting. It's about what does it mean to be a human, and doesn't matter. It was fine. But literally at the end of the book, you finish the last page, you like take a deep breath. Wow, that was a thrilling ending or whatever. And then it's a note from the author who says, yeah, I acknowledge that this book might not be what you expected, and the next one will be a little bit more normal. So probably he and his editors were a bit worried about this one as well. It was fun. It was a good installment. If you like closed room mysteries, this one's great. I didn't enjoy the memory aspect of it because it's not as fun to try and solve the murder when vital clues that you would have are gone because they're missing from the characters' memories and therefore from your memory too. That's just not as fun as something like old school, like Agatha Christie, where you are shown what is happening, or Sherlock Holmes, where you were told that you were stupid and clearly this was the answer. How did you not work it out with the clues that you weren't even given? So this one was less satisfying. But like I said, I still read it. I still liked it. I will still pre-order the next Stuart Turton. Just it wasn't out of the 3. This is number 3 in my ranking. And that is 5 books. Thank you for hanging out with me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.